To me, the NFC East was an interesting division in 2012. You had the defending Super Bowl champions in the New York Giants. You had two other teams with a lot of star power in the Dallas Cowboys and the Philadelphia Eagles. Yet it was the Washington Redskins behind a rookie quarterback in RG3 that ended up winning the division and being the only team out of the NFC East that made the playoffs in 2012. So let's take a look and see how the four teams in this division either did or did not improve themselves in the 2013 NFL Draft. The 2013 NFL Draft, to me, if nothing else, showed once again, for the umpteenth dozen effing time, that Jerry Jones has no business being a general manager, has no business constructing a draft board, has no business running a draft war room for any team, let alone his own team, the Dallas Cowboys. When is it going to sink through Jerry Jones's thick effing skull that you haven't won a Super Bowl in 17 seasons, and this year will make 18 that you haven't won one because you're not going to win it this year, and the one common denominator in all that is Jerry Jones running the damn draft board? You're an idiot. You might be a great businessman. You might be a good owner. But you are a horrible general manager, Jerry Jones. And this draft once again proved it. When you're reaching, you're getting caught up in the wave of offensive linemen going in round one. And you take a guy with a third-round grade in most everybody's minds in Travis Frederick, and you take him 31st. You take him at the end of round one. You are a moron. When you sit there and you have your team switching to a 4-3 cover 2 defense after running the 3-4 for many years, you decide that it's important to load up the talent on that side of the ball by trading up and getting a tight end in round number 2. Why in the blue fuck would you do that? It makes no damn sense. So you reached big time for your first round pick. You reached a little bit, but not as much for the second round pick. All the while putting aside your more important needs, which were on the defensive side of the ball, where there were players in both the first and the second round that could have significantly helped you with your conversion to that cover 2 defense. You're an idiot. And you see Jerry Jones, it's almost like you wish, if you're a Cowboys fan, he would have traded out of the first and second round picks, because when you look at what they did in the third and the fourth round and the fifth round, they had a really good draft, getting Terrance Williams and J.J. Wilcox and B.W. Webb and Joseph Randle. You've got two offensive players in Williams and Randle that are definitely going to be contributors and, could actually end up starting at some point in time in the future. You look at guys like Wilcox and Webb, two guys that really fit what Monte Kiffin wants to do in that cover 2 defense. So when you look at rounds 3 through 5, the Cowboys were really damn good. But it's the stupidity of taking a third-round pick at pick number 31. It's the stupidity of ignoring the defensive tackle position and going after a tight end like Gavin Escobar. I'm all for having more than one tight end, I'll grant you. But was he even the best tight end at the board at that point? No, he might not have been. And either way, this could be one of those drafts where you look back at the Cowboys and you say, yeah, Frederick's an okay player, Escobar's an okay player, but look at who they passed on. That's not good. Jerry Jones, you need to hire a general manager. You need to let somebody else run the draft, because once again, you clearly demonstrated, especially in rounds 1 and 2, that you have no clue what the hell you're doing. That's why the Cowboys got a C- to me, and that's why they will be an overrated, mediocre-ass team again in 2013. There was a mock draft or two that I did in the weeks leading up to the 2013 draft where I had the New York Giants mocked to take an offensive tackle, whether that be DJ Fluker or towards the end of the process, Menelik Watson. Now, you can imagine my surprise when Jerry Reese, the general manager, a guy who's done a really good job over the years in the draft of getting really good value at the right spot, when he took Justin Pugh, the offensive tackle from Syracuse, number 19. This is a left tackle with short arms, which usually is a recipe to move inside to guard or maybe play right tackle. Well, the problem is that Pugh has such really good footwork that it almost seems a tragedy to flip him inside to left or right guard. So I was surprised when the New York Giants took Justin Pugh in the first round, just a little bit. But after thinking about it, they needed some depth and some youth on that offensive line. Pugh could potentially come in and immediately start at right tackle. And, ultimately your team is still built around your franchise quarterback, in this case Eli Manning. And one way you help out Eli Manning is you give him better pass protection. You keep him upright, and you keep him healthy. So this might be a situation where when you look at Justin Pugh, you might sit there and say, wow, it was a bit of a reach. But 3 years from now, people will look back maybe and say, it didn't even matter. He was the right pick at that time. I do think that they got some really good value with their next 3 picks, Hankins and DeMontre Moore, and even looking at Ryan Nassib. They moved up a couple spots in round 4 to get him. So you got a defensive tackle who could potentially start, or at least he comes in and he proves to be a really good run stuffer for them in a rotation. You've got DeMontre Moore, who could maybe play some hybrid. He could play some defensive end and pass rush situations, some outside linebacker. To me, Moore ended up sliding a little bit more to where his draft value was, which was somewhere in the 3rd round. But getting him in the 3rd round was a really good value for that front office. And getting a guy like Nassib, a guy who was being talked about potentially just about a week before the draft, as a top 10 pick, or at least a 1st-round pick, to get him in round number 4 to be your backup to Eli Manning. 3 years from now, maybe Eli starts to lose it, and Nassib's your starter in New York. Or maybe Nassib impresses somebody and they give up a 1st or a 2nd-round pick to trade for him. That's what good organizations do. Create depth at the most important position in North American sports. So overall, I thought this draft for the Giants was very solid. I really like the values in picks rounds 2, 3, and 4. And I think that round 1 will end up proving to be a really good value, even though it doesn't look like it at the time being. I like Jerry Reese. I think he's a really good general manager, and I like this draft. Not the best draft they've ever had, but still a very solid one, and I give him a grade of B-. Chip Kelly is now the man in Philadelphia, and it's going to be interesting to see how his style translates from the college game to the pro ranks. So heading into this first draft, I felt it was incredibly important, in spite of many mocks that were talking about them taking a defensive lineman or a corner in the months leading up to the draft. No, that's what stupid teams do. You bring in an offensive-minded head coach, you have to make sure that his offense ends up working. So what do? You focus on the offensive side of the ball in that first draft. And that's basically what the Philadelphia Eagles did in the 2013 NFL draft, and I felt very wisely. Lane Johnson with the 4th overall pick. The bottom line is the Eagles' offensive line was boo-boo in 2012. You could say injuries, you could say whatever the fuck you want, but it doesn't change the fact that the offensive line sucked, period. So Lane Johnson, even though he is a bit of a risk, he does have huge upside. He becomes an instant upgrade. He kind of, ironically enough to me, when I watched him, compared to Jason Peters, who will be, you would assume, manning the left side there in Philadelphia. So you've got an instant upgrade at right tackle in Lane Johnson, the future left tackle in Lane Johnson. A very, very wise pick for the Philadelphia Eagles in this spot, unless I wanted to argue that they maybe should have taken Tavon Austin, and I probably would. But for them, I'm not going to knock them that much. The pick made sense for them. I was a little surprised that they took Zach Ertz from Stanford in round number 2. They already have Selleck at tight end. But again, you've got a coach coming in with a new offensive philosophy. You might as well give him as many weapons and as many tools to work with on that side of the ball as you possibly can. And Ertz is a solid tight end. He was solid value where they picked him at the early portion of round 2. A really good pick. Now, Benny Logan from LSU, the defensive lineman, it's curious to me if the Eagles are going to run a 4-3 or a 3-4 or a bit of a hybrid. Maybe Logan brings them some versatility. I thought he was a pretty good value for a 3rd-round pick. Getting Matt Barkley at the beginning of round number 4 could potentially be a coup. And I will say this. A lot of people are assuming automatically that Chip Kelly wants to run the exact same system that he ran in Oregon, and that's not necessarily the case. Chip Kelly is more focused on decision-making and making quick decisions, but the right decisions, and worried about tempo of the offense. It doesn't necessarily have to have an uber-mobile quarterback in order for his system to work. So you're looking at a guy like Matt Barkley, getting him a guy last year in the draft, if he would have declared like he should have, even in a draft with RG3 and Andrew Luck, still would have been a top 10 pick. You got him at the beginning of round 4. Getting Poyer in the 7th round, what a steal. To me, this was a really solid draft for the Philadelphia Eagles. I gave him a grade of B+, in part because I anticipate at some point in time down the road that Matt Barkley is going to be the starting quarterback in Philadelphia. And when he is, you spend a 4th-round pick on your starting quarterback. A guy that really, for all intents and purposes, had 1st-round value. This could be a real boon for the Philadelphia Eagles franchise going forward in the future, but a good, solid outing in Chip Kelly's first draft there in Philadelphia. When you look at the Washington Redskins, they gave up a lot to get RG3 in the 2012 NFL draft. And for them, it obviously ended up proving out to be the right decision. They had to do something. They needed a franchise player. They needed a face of the franchise. They needed a young quarterback. So I will always support their decision to trade up and go get RG3. You gave up a lot to do it, but now it comes down to, is this a really good organization or not? Because if they are, the fact is they didn't have a first-round pick this year. They won't have a first-round pick next year. And you still have the challenge of trying to build around RG3 without the benefit of 2 first-round picks. So this is where scouting and talent evaluation and finding the best values and the best players that fit your scheme all comes into play. And I have to be honest, I like the Redskins draft this year. Emerson from NC State, you have problems there in Washington in the defensive backfield. So I think Emerson's a guy that starts year one. He had risk associated with him. He was a much better player in 2011 than he was in 2012. But if he plays more like the player in 2011, the Redskins may have potentially gotten a first-round talent in the later portion of round number 2. That's what good organizations do. I was a little surprised they took Reed from Florida in the 3rd round. A little bit small for an NFL tight end, more of that H-back type of, move around piece. You can line up in the slot, you can line up wide, you can line up out of the backfield, somewhat on the line of scrimmage. But again, another weapon potentially for RG3 to work with, and that is important. You can't just sit there and say, oh, we got RG3, and that's it. We don't need any more. No, you still need to surround him with more weapons. You need to provide him with more help. I really thought they got good value with Phillip Thomas in the 4th round, the safety. I think he's a guy, again, that could be potentially a year 1 starter. And you look at other guys, too, like Chris Thompson and Bakari Rambo. These are 2 other guys that I envision making the roster in year number 1 and contributing maybe on special teams and maybe in a reserve-type role, especially in the case of, let's say, a Chris Thompson. He's a guy that brings a real speed element to the Redskins instead of most of their backs that are all the same type of player. Chris Thompson, if he could stay healthy, provides something different. He could be a little bit of a weapon that you deploy in different ways, maybe even in the return game. All in all, when you factor in the fact that the 1st-round pick was used from this year's draft in part to help acquire RG3, that has to be factored in. The Redskins did not do a horrible job here. They found pretty good values with most of their picks. I think they found several guys that will contribute both in 2013 and in the long run. I give the Redskins a real solid B grade here. They impressed me a little bit. They did a good job considering they didn't have a 1st-round pick.